Welcome. This is Lisa Picker from Carroll County Public Library. Our program tonight is presented by CCPL and a likely story bookstore, our woman-owned independent bookstore right here in Carroll County. Aliza will be interviewed by Ted Zaleski, Carroll's own original great reader and also the Director of Management and Budget for the county. Don't tell anyone, but I think he prefers this non-paying side gig. Please enter any questions you have for Aliza in the Facebook chat, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the program. Aliza Layne is a cartoonist, illustrator, and storyteller. She is the creator of Demon Street, a long-form fantasy webcomic for all ages. Her Halloween costumes have elicited the phrases theatrical. Don't you think you're doing it a little bit overboard? And oh, we remember you from last year. Beetle and the Hollowbones is her first graphic novel and will be released 1 week from today. You can order from the library or purchase your own from our friends at a likely story bookstore. It's my pleasure to present Aliza Layne.
Hi, I'm Aliza. I wrote a book called Beetle and the Hollowbones that I have here. And that's available for pre-order, and you can pre-order it from A Likely Story, as Lisa said. So Beetle is about a horrible, scrabbly little 12-year-old goblin named Beetle, and she has a best friend named Blob Ghost who has been soul sealed into the local mall and can't leave, died in the mall and is now stuck in the mall forever. And cannot go anywhere that is more fun than the mall, which is kind of bad. And Beetle and Blob Ghost are trying to figure out a little plan to get themselves out of this area, and so that maybe Blob Ghost can go home with her and hang out where they can actually watch cartoons. And things get a little bit more complicated. Beetle's old crush comes back to town, and her aunt is actually the owner of the property and has contracted the mall to be bulldozed with Blob Ghost inside. So the three of them need to kind of get their act together and become friends in order to prevent a horrible tragedy happening inside of the local mall. And meanwhile, Beetle is desperately trying to figure out how to ride a broom and how to do magic in a way that she likes to do it. And that's it. It's a magic adventure story for age 8 and up. So, and it's full color. It's actually fully painted. So it's a graphic novel, which is great for reluctant readers. And I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited to share it with you.
Okay. Before we went on the air, you were showing me a copy of the book you had, and
yeah,
all your little Post-its. Just want to show you. Here's the book.
Oh yes.
But I have
oh no! Oh my gosh!
I've been working at your book the same sort of way. I've spent a lot of time on you the last few weeks.
Oh my gosh!
So first thing I have to say is really a comment more about me than about the book. The first time I read through the book, I was struggling to understand what was going on. I said, what in the heck is going on in this book? And I started wondering, am I just too old for this? Am I not through this book? But it all worked out. I kept at it, and things started making sense to me. It reminded me when I was taking a course at McDaniel, which we'll come back to in a minute. I was doing the Masters of Liberal Arts, and we were reading the old Hindu book, the Bhagavad Gita. And I was reading it, and I had no idea what it was about. I read it about 20 times. It was just a short book. And eventually it started making sense to me, and I got the hang of it. Okay, so McDaniel College. I am right now sitting about 3 miles away from McDaniel College, and I found out you went there And not only that, but that you're a Carroll County native, which I did not run across. I have to ask
Yeah.
you, you're an English major at McDaniel. Now, I had several teachers I liked in the graduate program. I don't know if they did undergraduate classes though, but did you know Kathy Mangan, Pam Regis, or Del Palmer?
Yeah, I know Kathy Mangan. She was my mentor for a short time.
Oh, good. So I enjoyed my time there, and I actually teach a couple classes at McDaniel now.
Oh, wow.
Not English classes though. Now, before we get into Beetle and the Hollowbones, Lisa mentioned your webcomic Demon Street, which apparently you are fairly well known for. For those of us who aren't in the know on this, can you talk a little bit about what a webcomic is, and then about your webcomic Demon Street?
Sure. Oh my gosh. So if we have some younger people in the chat, they probably have at least heard of a webcomic. But webcomics started to become popular around like, I would say like 2005. People started posting comic strips online on their independent websites that were really similar to like cartoon dailies. And one really popular thing was people would post video game webcomics. So it would be people who were, jokes that were tailored to people who were already online. And then around about like 2010 or so, like 2008 to 2010, webcomics had this huge push where a bunch of comics started right around then. And comics started getting a lot more differentiated. So there started to be tons of different genres that people were writing in. And it was very similar to the way people are writing graphic novels now, especially as we're moving towards the latest era of webcomics. But back then you had people who were really exploring the format, like Meredith Gran with Octopus Pie. You undeniably had Homestuck. You can't say that you didn't. And Homestuck was really format breaking for everybody, and lots and lots of people read it, and lots of people, I think they made a good amount of money. So people started seeing it and going, oh, this is a viable career. I, in 2013, started a comic and hooked up with my publisher for online comics, which is Hiveworks Comics. And Hiveworks also publishes a bunch of other popular titles a lot of which started right around then. And the longer that webcomics were in existence, and the longer that the format was popular, the more elegant and gorgeous webcomics became, because people started to see that they could make a little bit of money doing this, not a lot of money, but a little bit of money. And then also they started to this competition started to get a little bit more intense. So you ended up with like a huge sci-fi fantasy genre in webcomics, and then you've got people now publishing their comics traditionally. So a lot of webcomics are made in the traditional page format that you can actually publish as a book, whereas a lot of the older comics were made in a like long form format, and you're seeing that now with comics on Webtoon. Like my friend Wendy does. Oh, good grief! I've forgotten the name of it. It's a webcomic about two mer people who are in love, and that's online Webtoon. And oh my God, I'm so sorry, Wendy. I've forgotten the name of it right now. But I was actually not contracted, but I was about to work on Webtoon as a colorist before Beetle like ramped up in intensity, and I had to start working on that a lot more. And so their model is really interesting. So they're back to like that long format of digital comic that aren't like made with they aren't made with print in mind, but some of them do end up in print. So I don't know how Webtoon does it, but it's this incredibly complicated and like beautiful and intense little art world that isn't spoken a lot about in the mainstream and doesn't make a ton of money. I think Line Webtoon makes a lot of money, but I don't know. But what you end up with is this huge group of peers who all have proved their comics chops really intensely, and then they move on and make work for print, because you do better in print. You get a little bit more money in print. And then people who aren't reading digitally will find your stuff in print. And you want to be able to, like, if you're going to make work for kids, you want to be able to reach out to like any kid, and any kid can go to the library, which is one really nice thing. And so Demon Street, I started while I was still at McDaniel in 2013. I graduated in 2014. And Demon Street is it's a light fantasy horror about going to another world and getting entangled in the the weird squabble between two gods. And the characters are kind of just trying to make it out of this alive while being pulled into this enormous conflict. It's a story about conflict, and a kid's story where there is no war. That was one of the things that I wanted to make sure I didn't write about, because I wasn't interested in it. So it's not anything like Narnia or any of the you see a lot of war in kids' books. You see a lot of, like, you look at like Redwall or something like that, you see a lot of war. But I was more interested in doing a macro conflict that is representational of a micro conflict. So the kids getting pulled into this horrible interplay between gods kind of is representational of the way that you are powerless as a child, in the same way that like Series of Unfortunate Events is about the way that you are powerless as a child. And then Beetle is a lot more lighthearted. So Demon Street is really not for super young readers. Everybody's different, but it's a little bit more scary. It's more intense, and there are a lot of scarier situations than in Beetle. Beetle is much funnier as well.
So you kind of grew up with webcomics, then got into your own, and now you've taken a little bit of a turn into a book of your own. Now you mentioned War and Redwall. This is years ago now, but I took my son to Chestertown to see Brian Jakes.
Wow!
Talk over there. That's it. I read. We both read all those books.
Oh, I love Redwall. It's really, really stellar.
Yep.
I was actually in an anthology that was kind of inspired by Redwall called Timorous Beastie. My friend Natalie, who actually helped me color the book as well, Natalie Reese, helped me color Beetle. But Natalie and I did a scary ant comic. So we were in an anthology inspired by books like Redwall. So I'm a big fan.
Now you mentioned help coloring the book. Actually, there's a question I had come a little bit later, but since you brought it up, you do make a point of thanking them for the work they did on your book. Can you explain what it is that they did and why it's important to you?
Oh, sure. So my book, because it's painted, is really labor intensive. It takes a lot of hours to paint a page. So Natalie and Christina Campera were both helping me by flat coloring the book. So what they would do is I would give them let's see. So the first, it's going to be really hard to see this, but the first chapter is all pages that I colored from like start to finish myself. And then as we like moved through the book, I was like, oh, this is going to take way past the like due date for the book. I need help. So I asked my friends to help me. And what they were doing is I would give them a color key. You see these in cartoons sometimes, in cartoon production. So you get a color key and you get a model sheet for the characters. So Beetle has a little model sheet with all of her different outfits that she wears. And it shows what color her skin is and what color her hair is, and what color everything she's wearing is. And all of the characters have that. Blob Ghost was easy to flat because they are one color. So, and then I would make little small versions of each scene like usually what I would do is I would color one page of the scene for every scene in the book. And then for the scenes that Natalie or Kristen were helping me with, I would send that page along and go, use this as a guide, flat color the backgrounds and flat color the characters. And then once everything is filled, so I would give them like a scene where I had fully painted some orange trees and some like fall foliage. And I had fully painted a picture of Beetle in that scene. So you could tell what color her skin needed to be in that scene. And they would lay down, you see this in a lot of comics that aren't painted. The colors will just be one tone for everything. So they would do one tone for everything based on the guide that I gave them. And then I would go in and paint everything else. So they did a huge amount of the labor. And it was really, really, really helpful. And I wouldn't have gotten it done without them.
And Aliza mentioned what color skin should be for various characters. Now, it'd be hard to fully describe this until somebody gets to see the book, but there's a lot of unusual characters, unusual looking characters in this book. And Beetle, the main character, is a goblin, and her skin is green. So if you picture a little bit later Wicked Witch of the West, you kind of have the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, Beetle's
So
bright
now,
green. I have a lot of pictures of her up on my website and on my Twitter and stuff.
Now the town where they live is called Aloes, which I'm supposing is for All Hallows Eve or
Yes.
Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa mentioned you had a bit of a thing for Halloween costumes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, every year I kind of try to top myself on Halloween costumes. And a couple of years running now, I have done, oh, sorry, there's going to be a few cars going by. But a couple of years ago, I did a full pumpkin head costume. So I took a jack-o'-lantern craft head from the Michaels and cut my own pumpkin head face into it and cut a smile into it, and then did a costume around that. And I covered the inside of the costume with a mesh and lit the inside with those little tea candles that I thought I had one around here, but I don't think I do. But those little electric tea lights. So I had the inside of the head lit, and then I would sit in a lawn chair outside my house and wait for kids to walk up. And kids would think that I was a statue. And so I would, with littler kids, I would immediately start moving as soon as they came up, because otherwise I might scare them. But middle schoolers were really afraid of me, and they would come up, and I would be like laying there in the chair, like kind of limply, just kind of like trying to trick them. And they would come up, and I would like slowly be like, and they would be like, ah! And it's wonderful. So I'm a big fan of the classics. I can't imagine that like somebody connected to this live stream would not have come to my house on Halloween, because I live on kind of a popular Halloween street. But yeah, I think last year I was a wizard. Oh, I actually have the beard right here. So I wore the beard. So I have the wizard beard, which I made myself out of needle felt. And just did that, and that was a little bit easier and a little bit lighter. Little kids thought I was Santa Claus, which I thought was really cute.
Okay, as I was reading your book, and while reading and rereading, one thing really stood out to me as one of the big things in the book, and that was what you did with eyes. There's a lot going on with eyes in your characters. Now Beetle, and I didn't try and count it, but I mean her eyes change so many different ways. I'm sure it's dozens and dozens of different Beetle eyes. But it's not just about that. And then Blob Ghost, or BG, you talked about a little bit earlier, is a blob. Now he sometimes makes himself look like something, but he's just a blob. But for a blob, has very expressive eyes. Yeah, you can see a lot going on when you look at BG. And then I want to touch on this a little bit later, goblin magic versus sorcery. But Beetle has in places what I started calling in my mind her sorcery eyes. When certain things are happening, her eyes take on a very distinctive look that is tied to this idea of her doing sorcery. And then, and actually, I have a longer list of these things, but there's one more thing I want to mention. Then I'm interested to hear, how consciously you were going about, doing things with eyes, or if it's just kind of happened. But Gran, Beetle's grandmother, who is also her mentor, we don't see her eyes until the very end of the book. There's kind of one place where you sort of see one eye. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about. But now I'd be interested to hear what was going through your mind with eyes in this book.
Well, I think one of the most important things with character design is that you make your characters as expressive as possible. And I don't like to limit myself to a specific model when I'm drawing characters. So a lot of the times characters are going to go wildly off, like whatever the model would be. And so Beetle's eyes can like blow out big like a cat or turn into a little slit. She can have like really big, expressive, like shoujo manga eyes. And she can have like a plethora of different expressions, because I'm not sticking to one little thing, and I'm not sticking to like a particular eye type. And so I try and do that with all the characters. With Gran, it just ended up that her eyes being small was the cutest look for her, so she ended up just looking the cutest with her eyes like completely hidden and shut. And that gave me the ability to when she kind of becomes a little bit more powerful and a little bit scarier, to have her eye like peek out a little bit, which was a little bit more like, oh my God, things are getting a little bit more real now, because Gran's opening her eyes big enough for us to see them. With Blob Ghost, I was very deliberate in creating their look and their ability to shapeshift, because I originally came up with these characters to pitch them as a cartoon. And I was really inspired by stuff like Adventure Time. Adventure Time has a really clever model with the way that they're putting their characters together, because they've got Finn, who's like your proxy character, so that you can enter the cartoon in your mind. And then you have Jake the dog, who can stretch and change his body in any way that he feels like. He has like certain limits, but they're not hard limits, and it's really hard to figure out what he can and can't do, so that they can write anything they want around him. And I was like, oh, well, if a character is pliant like that, it could be really interesting and give like an opportunity for really good jokes, first of all. And then second of all, you can use that character's abilities to like affect the world in interesting ways, in ways that other characters kind of can't do. And it actually does play into the plot a little bit, depending on whether I get a book 2 or not, which I don't know yet. But Blob Ghost in particular is a character who uses they, them pronouns. And some people don't know, like, some people aren't as familiar with people who use they, them pronouns, but they, them pronouns are an option to use if you don't want to go by she and you don't want to go by he, you can go by they. And there are a bunch of other ones. But Blob Ghost is intentionally an ambiguous character, because it's a lot of people's like great wish to be able to change their body in ways that would reflect how they're feeling at the moment. And Blob Ghost is kind of meant to not only express that, but express like the pliant nature of, you feel very like pliant when you're a kid. You feel like very like unsettled into a particular shape. And Blob Ghost is kind of the youngest character, so to speak, although Blob Ghost doesn't really have a particular age. Blob Ghost, I would mentally was like a year younger than Beetle is, but that's not canonical so much as it's how I was writing the character. And so Blob Ghost feels, Blob Ghost kind of goes on a journey throughout the book themselves of figuring out why they're trapped where they're trapped, and how they can get out again, and how they can kind of express themselves in a way that isn't like smushed down into a little package. And so the comic builds to climax for that part of the character. And so I wanted to keep everybody really expressive and pliant and really able to, so like Kat's a skeleton. So Kat is a little skeleton girl, and she has little dot light eyes. And those can change color depending on how she's feeling. And Beetle's eyes are really big and expressive and weird. And Blob Ghost is way more pliant than the other characters because Blob Ghost goes through all of these changes naturally, and is a naturally fluid character, which is intentional.
And I did see the they them for Blob Ghost. I just realized I let myself slip into.
Oh, that's okay.
I think him, and it took me a while to figure that out. I remember thinking about it on the way. And on the side of the eyes, you mentioned Kat's eyes changing color sometimes. One spot in the book I really liked was when Beetle and Kat had a big fight, and I forget what Beetle said, but you have one picture of just Kat's eyes, and her eyes look like, oh wow, that hurt. Did you mean that? And then immediately after that, you have her eyes again, except she's totally changed now to I hate you. I don't care what you think. It was really impressive what you did with just those two pictures of a set of eyes.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I put a lot of thought into how the book is like directed, so to speak.
Now I mentioned Beetle and her sorcery eyes, and that she's a goblin. So she's learning, or supposed to be learning, goblin magic from Gran, but not doing a very good job of it. And what she's really doing is wishing that she could be learning sorcery like Kat is. And she talks about how goblin magic isn't really magic; it's just medicine. It's not like necromancy or sorcery. It's something less, and she's not happy with it. But then later in the book, and without giving away what everything happens, I think there's kind of a big moment where she pulls together goblin magic and sorcery and does something kind of new with her magic. That's just talk a little bit more about the different magics and how Beetle fit into all that.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. So all of that is written lore that I didn't at any point have like a long thing where it explains it to the audience, because I think people will kind of be able to draw their own conclusions, especially if I get to keep making books. This is going to get more and more and more explained, and you'll understand more and more and more of how it all works. But in the first book, what's important is that goblin magic is mostly unused. So goblins have like a big magic that is available to them. And Gran is a practitioner of goblin magic in that form. But anybody can do the things that Beetle is doing, which are making potions and doing little incantations and spells based on potion ingredients. And so she's over it. She's not interested in it, and it's not the thing that she's passionate about, which is sorcery. Sorcery is the more Harry Potter magic of all of them, where goblin magic is what you would expect goblins to be doing, which is like throwing bones into a pot and like cooking it up. But she's more interested in the like very big, if you've read any Terry Pratchett, it's very the witch magic versus the wizard magic. The witches are barely doing magic at all, even though they're very powerful. They're mostly doctors, whereas the wizards are very powerful and can alter reality and can like mess around with time and are making pseudo computers, but they are like not doing anything almost ever. They're almost never doing anything. So those two magics are really inspired by those pretty heavily. So sorcery is all condensed around having like a crystal. So if you have a crystal, you can do sorcery. If you are inclined to do sorcery, if you have the ability to do sorcery, and you get a crystal from like the sorcery council, and you can do sorcery now. And this is mostly given to people who are going to school. And this is kind of built into the idea that Beetle is not able to afford to go to wizard school. It's I'm kind of playing off Harry Potter a little bit too there, where Harry is actually a very wealthy character. He immediately he's a poor character until he immediately comes into wealth and has wealth for the rest of the run of the series. J.K. Rowling's recent nastiness notwithstanding, you kind of have to reference Harry Potter when you're talking about the way that books about magic are written in the 2020s. It's, you know, she's bad, but I have to talk about this because it's relevant. So I wanted to access the feelings of a character who isn't wealthy, and in a world where you have to pay to go to wizard school, like that, because that's how it would, because Beetle's world is sort of allegorical to ours. And if it were our world, you would have to pay to get into wizard school. You have to pay to get into regular school. You have to, you know, if you want to go beyond, if you want to get into college, and if you want to move on to like an academic education, you have to pay money. And she's totally without access to that. So she's like, well, we just can't. We can't, and that's how it is. And Kat kind of serves as a foil for this, where she has total access to a wizard education. She has total access, and she's under tons of pressure because of it. Because she has this access, it's ruining her childhood, because she's under so much pressure to perform. And so the two of them that's one of the main things that set them at odds with each other, is that not only are they being set at odds in the plot by Blob Ghost's like peril that they're in, but they're also being set at odds in the plot because they're economically different, and they're coming from two different backgrounds, and they have to kind of come to understand each other a little bit better. Where the feeling of oh, I can't do this because I can't do this. Like I cannot get there to learn the things that you're good at. And the resentment of that is really palpable in Beetle. And then Kat resents her because her home life is happy. Beetle has a really good home life, and Beetle and her grandmother are a team in a way that Kat isn't with her family. And so that juxtaposition kind of is built into how the magic works for Beetle specifically as a character. And so there's this world of magic, and there's all of this different stuff it can do. And then I wanted to talk about with Beetle how that would play into your actual experience as a person. Like, what do you and don't you have access to, and how does that affect your relationships?
Yeah, and in the mix there with Kat and Beetle is also very different family expectations. And of course, in the real world, you know, we see different people with, you know, what do your parents and grandparents expect of you? What are you supposed to do with your life? And, you know, Kat, as you kind of alluded to, you know, the expectations are you're going to be a great sorcerer. You have to do this. You have to do this fast. And with Beetle, you know, it's much less pressure. You know, let's get you the next thing, and, you know, try and move you along. And that comes into play with a lot of how their relationship works. Now, when you were talking about webcomics earlier, you talked about one you said was kind of format breaking. I wanted to talk a little bit about the format in your book. Now, I have done some interviews with some other graphic novel writers, so this isn't my first time through, but there were some things about how you laid yours out that kind of struck me as a little bit different. And I actually went through your book and I was counting how many panels there were per page. I was just trying to get a feel for what was going on. And it was actually anywhere from one, and a page, from the way I was looking at the book, would actually be 2 pages of the book, as if you had it laying open. Mm-hmm. Anywhere from 1 to 19.
Yeah.
And on average, about 10 and a half. And I went and looked at some other books. That wasn't unusual. And I think maybe a little bit more than I'd see in some. But what was unusual about your layout, I think, was that the panels were often set up in odd ways of organization, had odd shapes, sometimes even kind of curling sort of shapes rather than a typical little rectangle. Sometimes there was a panel that wasn't even defined with an outline, kind of just dropped on top of another panel. And as I was going through counting, I actually found myself correcting myself later. I said, well, there's 6 here. I said, oh no, there's 7. No, wait a second, there's 8. And at times, and I don't mean that you weren't in control of it, but it almost feels a little chaotic. Like, okay, wait a second, let me figure out what's happening here. So again, I'd like to hear from you. How much of that was, a conscious choice you were making? How much was it just kind of felt good to do it the way you did it, or what was going on there?
That part was extremely conscious. That part was done with that part was my perfect clockwork. That was my perfect machine. So as I was, and this, having editors helps with this a lot, because if the flow of the page, if the gestalt of the page is broken, people aren't going to be able to read it. And as I was making this, I was aware that okay, some people are going to have trouble reading this because of the format that I'm putting it in. And that's just sort of what I have to, I have to accept that if I'm going to make something that is this weird. And so, yeah, I think that comes from webcomics. Demon Street is upwards of 600 pages long. So I have a good amount of experience just sort of making sure that I'm breaking the format in a way that's interesting to look at, and that's interesting to read. And as I was going through Beetle, I was so the way that the way that comics work, at least the way that I do them, this isn't standard for everybody, but this is generally how it is. You do a teeny tiny little drawing at first called a thumbnail. And then you take that thumbnail and you draw it again as a sketch. And then you take that sketch and you draw it again, but you're doing the ink now. And that'll be the final way that the... Oh, I'm so sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, we lost you for a second, but you're...
Okay. Yeah. So there'll be a... Sorry, I got thrown off. Oh, we'll do inks, and inks are all of the characters and all of the backgrounds are now drawn, and they look the way that they will look in the final. Then you do flat colors, and flat colors cover the entire page in color, but they aren't the painted final. Then you do the final paint, and then after that, you're adding the speech bubbles in the text, which with Beetle we added after the ink stage. But I commonly do it after color, although I plan them out inside of the thumbnail. And so I know everything that's going to be said, and I know where all the speech bubbles are, but they're not done. So after the color, they're done. And then you add the sound effects and the little touches and the sparkles. And if the page has sparkles, you're adding those last on top of everything else. And I draw all of this in Clip Studio Paint, which is a Photoshop-alike program, but that is made for comics. I believe it was originally in Japanese and then got ported over to the US a few years ago. and it's cheaper than Photoshop. I like it a lot more. It's not a subscription. And anyway, so the page gets laid out like that. And so everything that is going to become the final page layout happens in the thumbnail and sketch stage. And then I'll pass those on to my editors and they'll go, okay, this isn't reading right. We need to move this around. So that the most important thing when you're making comics is to lead the eye where in the direction that you want it to move. And if you're going to break the eye in the West wants to move this way. Am I mirrored? Wants to move from left to right, the way that you would read a typical book. So you want to move the eye from left to right, and you want to move the eye down the page. And so everything in the book is leading your eye sideways, sideways, down, sideways, down, like a typewriter. And so breaking that format, you have to be really careful because you're laying your bubbles in these like triangular panels, and you have to make certain that the eye is going to go, okay, dot, 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 dot. And that was one of the most planned things that I did in Beetle, because if I hadn't planned it, the book would be unreadable. So it was very, very carefully planned. I'm glad that you eventually were able to kind of have a nice time with it. But I was aware that it was going to be a little bit tough for people who don't typically read comics. Comics as a format are not like, you can go into a movie without knowing the language of film, and you can go into a book kind of if you don't know what you're doing. If you learn to read some way else somehow before books, if you learn to read somehow else, you could probably go into a book and figure out the format. But because you immediately start watching movies and you immediately start reading books when you're little, it can be kind of hard to make the jump to comics if you're not used to it, because you're just not used to the language that they're written in. Like you natively start to learn the language of cinema, even if you don't have words for it. But comics, because they're not quite as mainstream as cinema, and they're not quite as mainstream as TV, you're not immediately jumping into them with a base knowledge. So I'm glad that you took the time to spend a little extra time with it. But I do think that's what makes comics so good for reluctant readers, because it does make you learn a new language. But if you don't like the language that books are written in, if that's just not your language, then maybe this is your language. And maybe, and when kids are young, their brains can pick it up really quickly. So it's not as big a problem for them. But yeah, everything in the like layout of the page was incredibly planned, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to read it.
You know, it's interesting that you put that out there as kind of learning a language, because that is actually how I felt. You know, as I was reading and rereading it, it felt like learning how to speak a different language. Now, oh geez, you made me think about something I was going to say.
Oh gosh.
Maybe it'll come back. Okay, somewhere in what you were talking about, you mentioned adding the speech bubbles. And Blob Ghost, or BG, was very interesting in this way. BG doesn't talk, but communicates through images that they share.
Thank you.
In some way. And you know, it was a learning experience for me with BG as well. It was really interesting. The third time I was reading the book, it became very apparent to me that I had been missing a lot of what BG had been communicating. There was so much more than I realized. And I started looking harder at some of the images that were the communications. And in many cases, you know, it was, again, a kind of an impressive thing how a little image could so accurately make the communication that was needed in certain situations. That's so can you talk a little bit about and communication?
Yeah, absolutely. So Blob Ghost, Blob Ghost in the original comic, I wrote the like prototype version of Beetle in 2014 as like a Halloween special, and showed it to people on, at that point, Tumblr, and so that in that proto comic, BG is also talking in these visual text bubbles, and I wanted to represent like a different way of speaking, and then also it plays into in a lot of ways Beetle is a story about when you're a kid and you only have one friend, and so like for BG, Beetle is that friend, and for Beetle, Blob Ghost is that friend. So Blob Ghost and Beetle are each other's person, and then when Cat comes to town, Cat slowly realizes that not only does she not have a person, but her person, who was her best friend, is now best friends with someone else, and is not as accessible to her as being her person as she thought. And to have Blob. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm popular today. I'm on an iPad, so the calls are being routed to the iPad. So I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. So having Blob Ghost talk that way gave Beetle and Blob Ghost the avenue of having like a shared language, and explained a little bit more about how they came to be each other's like best friend and then like confidant and only person, because Beetle can read those text bubbles with no problem. Beetle has no issue reading those. She reads them as soon as they're said. She sees them and can immediately communicate what Blob Ghost is talking about. So it's a way of visually representing Blob Ghost has a different way of talking, and that can kind of correlate to a lot of different things in real life. But I think it might be nice for like a kid to see if they have trouble communicating in some way. And so that was, and it's one of the things that only comics can do. You can't really make a character do this in another medium. And I remember this because I originally, after the original comic, where Beetle and Blob Ghost appeared, I was going to try and pitch it as a cartoon. And I was like, oh wait, Blob Ghost can't talk this way if they're in a cartoon. There's no way that will fly. So I was going to rewrite Blob Ghost's character to be a singing character and to communicate all of their emotions through like little notes. I was going to have them be a theremin, and then Beetle would translate the theremin. And that would have worked a little bit better because Blob Ghost would have been able to move and communicate through the movement as well. But in a comic, you don't have audio and you don't have movement. You just have visuals and text. And if you decide to take text away, you have to use visuals or it's not going to work. So Blob Ghost was also a strengthening exercise for me. I was like, how can I make a non-speaking character work in a comic where you have two things? You have text and you have visuals, and that's all you've got. So how can I make this character who doesn't talk work? And I was like, oh, well, this is an interesting challenge for me. So that's where that came from. And I'm really glad you took the time to go through all of that, because there's a cliche, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I think Blob Ghost can communicate really efficiently for comics, because there is that problem of fitting all the text into the speech bubbles and having them read naturally. But if you look at Blob Ghost's talking, you get just like a picture of the wind blowing through a graveyard to communicate, I don't know, I feel empty about that. Or you get a mean picture of like a cockroach to communicate, I hate that guy. And you manage to say a bunch of things about what they're thinking and what their internal world is without actually having to rely on speech bubbles. And sometimes that's more page efficient.
And you talk about the challenge of doing this. I'd say you answered the call of the challenge. It ended up being very successful. Yeah, it took me a little bit to get the hang of it, but once I did, it worked. I remembered what I was going to say, you were talking about the relationship between Beetle and Blob Ghost, and then Cat coming. Another piece of what's going on here is Blob Ghost is very worried about losing losing Beetle to Cat. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is one of the like central things, and it's almost more important than what's going on with the mall and the actual like dire situation. Like, this is the emotional heart of what the dire situation means for Blob Ghost and for Beetle. The problem with the mall kind of serves as as an externalization of what they're going through as characters, and their little like interplay as people. So as it moves towards its conclusion, you kind of have the you have the ability to like kind of look at these relationships and go, okay, well, this relationship is functionally completely different, and it ends up kind of being, what if I lose my best friend when they start dating somebody else? What if my best friend gets a girlfriend and then we don't get to hang out anymore? And that little interplay is kind of the heart of the story in a lot of ways, which I was really glad to be able to put in there, because I found it really interesting. And then it also, it makes the dire situation that's going on feel a lot more real and a lot more pressing, because there's an emotional core to it beyond physical danger. It's like, this person is so important to me. This is my only friend. We are each other's only friend in the world. And it kind of plays into, when you're a gay kid, it can be a little isolating. It's like really isolating because you don't grow up with people around you who are the same minority as you, unless you're very lucky. And I think for a lot of kids in rural areas, especially, this is true. And so Beetle and Blob Ghost and Cat all speak to like the different types of loneliness that you can encounter when that's your situation. And I wanted to include that. I wanted to make this a very personal story and a very real story that kind of has a life to it beyond the immediate peril and the immediate adventure of the story. So that's what that's about.
And to tie together the last two things we talked about, how Blob Ghost communicates, and the fear of losing the relationship with Beetle. Also, again, impressive that how clearly you were able to communicate that with those images of BG. No words, no explanation, but it was very clear what was going on in BG's mind. Now, there's a lot in this book that is different than life as most of us experience it, but there are some things that are the same stuff that we all deal with. Now, I know Beetle is 12, and I said teen angst, but I'm off.
Wow. You have teen angst when you're 12, more than any other time almost.
Okay, and then being weird, not being cool, uncertainty, status, jealousy, insecurity, all those things are in play here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very YA narrative in a lot of ways.
Now, guys are noticeable in this book by their almost complete absence.
Yeah.
Now, there's reference to Horace Silvercuff, who needs some help from Gran. There's a security guard.
There is.
A council member. But other than that, and there are some characters that it's hard to know what you're looking at. Oh yeah, and that reminds me, you talked about your pumpkin head costume. There was a pumpkin head character in your book, an unpleasant person in a retail store. So was the absence of guys just an accident of how the story developed, or were you saying we don't need guys in this story?
I believe in economy of character when you're writing a story. So there are incredibly few important named speaking characters in this narrative. There's beyond the three main characters, the only minor characters are Beetle's grandmother, the villain, and Mrs. Gashidakiro, who is a giant skeleton. And Mrs. Gashidakiro is only in it for a very short amount of time, even though she is on the back of the book. Actually, wait, I have the back of the book. So this is Mrs. Gashidakiro. A Gashidakiro is a Japanese yokai. So it ended up being that in order to tell the story I wanted to tell, I had to have very few characters, especially in order to keep it finite. Like if I had a bunch of characters, like if I had a small cast of kids who were all friends, either I would have had to sacrifice having any character to their characters at all, or I would have had to make a 600-page book, like with Demon Street, which does have a boy main character along with a girl main character, and has a few more characters who are central and who are main, and so it ended up being that in order to tell the tightest story, because I decided that Beetle was raised by her grandmother back in 2014. And then I decided that Kat's aunt, who was the villain, Kat's aunt was going to be a lady, because that was the first design that I came up with. I was like, oh, here's a character. Like, I was like, okay, well, I've designed Kat at that point. And I'm like, okay, well, now it's time to design a family member for Kat who's going to be the villain. And I was like, well, what's the most interesting thing I can do? And so Mrs. Hollowbone is the villain, and she's a bird skeleton. So she has a long neck that can comedically accordion, and a big giant evil beak. There's no possibility for redemption for birds. She's extremely spooky in the way that a bird skeleton is, and way less expressive than the other characters. And because I decided to go with her, it left no room for anyone else. Like once I had laid down the like central cast and gone, okay, well, Beetle has a grandmother, and Blob Ghost is Blob Ghost, and Kat is here. And because the love interest is a girl, there wasn't really any room for anybody else. If I get more books, there will probably be boys in them. But it was the story that I wanted to tell at that time.
You mentioned Mistress Gashidakoro. It actually was a learning experience for me. When I ran across that, I said, well, that's an interesting word. And I actually looked it up and found out that it was Japanese, meaning giant skeleton.
Yes.
How did you happen to come to use that?
Oh, I wanted to include some yokai because yokai are like, so Halloween is super American. Halloween is not, there are festivals around the world that are like Halloween, but are like really different. There's the Mari Lloyd in Wales. I don't know if there's a Mari Lloyd in the book. Mari Lloyd is a I think it's Welsh. Mari Lloyd in Wales is a festival where they take a horse skull. They take a big horse skull and they put it on a pole, and they put flowers around the skull, and they carry it around on a pole and clack the teeth up and down. And they walk up to people's houses and knock on the. It's like mumming. It's very much like caroling, but it's a mumming tradition. And there's like bonfire nights, and there's like the solstice as a celebration. But because Halloween is so American, I wanted to include other traditions so that it would, like, you're going to read the book and people from around the world are going to know it's Halloween, because people know what Halloween is. And in fact, Halloween is like not done in Japan, but it is celebrated somewhat, like it's like cool and fun the way it is here, but it's not like a thing the way it is here. And so the Japanese have a whole separate spooky little things tradition that has a whole different plethora of spooky little things. And so in the same way that like there's goblins all over the world, like there's a whole bunch of different creatures that are like goblins from all over the world, coming from like different traditions of different like teeny tiny little weird looking knobbly creatures that live in the ground. So that's coming from everywhere. And in the same way, spooky little things are coming from everywhere. So I wanted to include a few spooky little things that are not American spooky little things. And so Mrs. Gashidakuro is the main yokai that's present. Although I think there's a couple others that you can spot as you read through. But and the Gashidakuro I think got popularized. Oh, I don't want to be wrong. I think it got popularized based on a woodcut that was done by, he's the last great master of like the Japanese woodcut. So he was a little bit late in the game. I think he was in the like late 1800s or early 1900s. But there's this huge famous woodcut of a skeleton, like a huge skeleton breaking into someone's house that represents, I think, famine. I want to say famine. But yeah, that's where that came from. I thought that was really fun and I wanted to include it. And I wanted to make it a little bit more benign than it is for fun. But it kind of is also a nod to like, there's a huge cultural exchange between America and Japan when it comes to comics. And so you're seeing people who come from like an American tradition and people who come from a manga tradition playing off of each other. And I wanted to kind of give a special nod to that cultural exchange. So like it's kind of a sweet thing. It's kind of a nice thing. So I wanted to make sure there was something in there that was explicitly a yokai that wasn't in the background. And I didn't have a lot of characters to play with. And the idea of a giant skeleton was just so funny that I had to do it. So that was part of the like landscape of weird little creatures that I wanted to include. And if you look through the book, I don't think I have a colored page. But there are several scenes actually where some of my friends appear as weird little creatures. I think at the beginning, yep, here we go. So this spread, if you can tell what you're looking at, this is at the beginning of chapter 2, I think. And actually, you're gonna have the colored version that I don't even have. But I have a bunch of friends appearing in the background as little characters. So there's a bunch of pals in there for them to like find themselves in their Halloween costume. So you can find them as like, yeah, my friend Zach, who does the Paranatural webcomic, appears as a clown frog, and my friend Marty is like a big beautiful bat, and my friend Eden is a snail. With a bunch of other little snails clinging to her, and there's a bunch of like little fun touches like that. So I'm populating my world too with friends of mine.
Okay, Lisa's video is back on, which means she probably wants to go to questions. So I'm gonna say one last thing before we move on there. I think my favorite moment in the book, Beetle and BG are having a confrontation with a dragon who is guarding the treasures of the mall fountain. And BG, again, communicating through these little images, basically is yelling at the dragons, saying, "You're being stupid and you're going to end up dead." I thought it was just really great how again you're able to pull that off without any to explain. I see her, but I don't hear her.
Oh, uh-oh.
Are you on, Lisa?
I am. Okay, all right. Little technical glitch there. Okay, so I feel like the reporter in the field here. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right,
Yes.
So from Tamara, we have Friendship is Magic. And Alexandra said she's so excited about this book. And then also from Alexandra. Aliza, can you tell us about your path to getting published?
Sure. So I originally put Beetle together as like a pitch packet, and was going to shop it around to different agents. And so I was like, okay, I don't know how to find an agent. I don't know who they are. And so I was like, okay, well, some of my friends have agents. Surely one of their agents is taking clients right now. So what I did is I looked at all of my friends' Twitters and looked to see if they had a link to who represented them. And I clicked on all the links and I emailed everybody and went, hey, I'm looking to shop a book around. With graphic novels, you don't necessarily have to have the entire thing written ahead of time. I had an outline that was a little bit more bare bones than it should have been. And I had a pitch packet with the designs for the characters. As I shopped it around, I got like a couple trickling emails back, like, no, I'm not taking clients. I don't think this is right for what I'm shopping right now. Like a lot of people have a lot of agents have their niche of books that they do and of books that they're interested in pushing forward. And then it's also about whether they connect with you personally and whether they connect with your work, because they're going to be the ones selling it. So you need them to actually be excited about it. So a couple of agents just passed because they were like, I'm not the right person for this project and I wish you well. And I was like, great, okay. And so that took like a year. That was like a year where I was cold emailing agents, maybe a little less than a year, where I was cold emailing agents that I found online and sending them, hey, I have this thing that I want to send to publishers. Will you help me? And then I connected with Susan Graham, my current agent, who is at Einstein Literary Management. And they were super excited about the project. And they were like, yes, I love it. And we talked on the phone and we were immediately like hitting it off. And it was like, oh, great. We love all the same things. We both love Aberrat, which is like an old YA fantasy series that Clive Barker wrote and illustrated himself in oils. And it's way less intense than all of his other stuff that isn't for kids. And I like it a lot more.
I read that as well as all of his adult books too. He's a strange guy.
I like his kids' books a lot more than his adult books because they have to rein him in. And so he can't be that gross because they won't let him, which is so nice. I really prefer him ungross. But we both had a big passion for Aberrat. And so we were talking about that and we just really hit it off, which is really the main thing. And then we shopped for like 9 months, I want to say, shopped the book around to different publishing houses. So we talked to Penguin and we talked to Graphics and we talked to Penguin was the main one because we sat at Penguin for quite a long while. We ended up not being able to go with Penguin because the editor decided to leave publishing. So, but she helped me out a lot. She helped shop the book a little bit with me, and the book would not be the same without her. And big ups to Stacy, who helped me so much at Penguin, and I hope she's doing well out there. I think she might have gone back to school, but we just kind of moved it around a little bit. I think we talked to, oh my goodness, Top Shelf, I think. I don't remember everybody, but we talked to a bunch of publishers and they all either passed for one reason or another. Like a lot of them had something that was a little bit like this in production already. And it wasn't that they had the same thing. It was that they had something that would have competed with this. So they were like, oh, well, we don't want to be putting out two books that are going to be in direct competition with one another. And then when we talked to Simon & Schuster was not putting out a ton of graphic novels at that time. I think they're starting to build, they're starting to build their graphic novel pipeline in comparison to Random House, who already has like an imprint and already has like a special section for that. So SNS was interested, and I ended up hooking up with my editor. My agent connected me to my editor, and my editor and I worked together, and my agent was also like super involved. They're really great. But my editor and I worked on developing the project out to a full script. At which point we started, like, the wheels started really turning for the book. So the like path to it was interesting to find that people in publishing knew who I was from Demon Street, because I didn't think they would, but a lot of them seemed to know, and that was fun. They were like, I've seen her around, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm glad that you have. But yeah, the path to publishing, I know a lot of people have it a lot rockier. The wheels of publishing move pretty slow. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't an insurmountable amount of work. It just takes a really long time, and you have to be willing to be annoying. You have to be willing to annoy the living hell out of everybody that you talk to, and you have to be willing to email people who you think are never going to look at your email. And that's really the main thing, is just coming at it with like a blind desire to email people.
Okay, the next is from TJ, who says, hi, Aliza. Can you talk about the metaphors you were trying to convey through magic, being a goblin, etc.? What are the deeper messages you were trying to convey and touch on?
Oh, you're gonna make me not do Death of the Author, huh, TJ? It really depends. I wanted it to be really broad, so that especially like a bunch of different kids could relate to it. And I already talked about this a good bit with talking about like what can you access and what can you afford to learn. But one of the like core conceits that I wanted to convey was that Beetle's desire to be a sorceress is really built into her desire to be a creative person. And Kat's desire to be a sorceress is really like pushed on her in a way that isn't immediately like, she's not doing it because she has a passion for it. She does have a passion for it, but it's not why she's doing it. And because it's being pushed on her, she can do really impressive things, but feels really sheepish about it. Like, she's showing off in a lot of the book. But she's kind of like, oh, well, I wish I had been spending this time that I spent learning this having connections to other people. And so the magic ended up being metaphorical for a lot of things, but one of the like key metaphors and the key like ways that magic was important was in its like function as a metaphor for like not social capital, but the way that sociality happens between kids who are from like different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then also I wanted it to be really big and pretty and cool. And I wanted kids to be able to like, one of the biggest things with it was that I wanted kids to be able to pretend this. I wanted kids to be able to look at this book and go, oh, I want to play that. I wanted it to be a way that a kid could have like a fun, like, pretend time. I wanted it to be a world that was open enough where if you wanted to create your own character and have your character be really important in this world, you could do it. And so the magic is in almost as big a way, if not a bigger way, meant to be really fun looking and really like exciting looking, so that you can pretend that you're doing it. And when you pretend you're doing it, it's really cool. And that kind of plays into like, I'm running a pre-order campaign actually, where I wrote a little tabletop RPG that people can email beetlettrpg@gmail.com with a copy of their receipt from their pre-order, and I will email them a free packet with this game that they can play. And it's like Dungeons and Dragons a little bit, or like Betrayal on the House of the Hill, where you can make a little character and have like an adventure with them and your friends as their characters. And so that kind of plays into like, I wanted the magic to be really fun. I wanted the world to be really inviting, and those really play into each other. And one of the reasons why I wanted to encourage people to play this as a game is that I think it would make a really fun game. Like, it's a fun pretend world.
Aliza, I'm glad you brought up the tabletop RPG, because we had a couple of comments about it in the Facebook stream. Marky asks, what is your advice for new writers looking to get started with their story ideas?
I think you should make a bunch of little things before you make the big thing. And people told me that, and I ignored them. And I didn't listen to this, but I should have. I really should have made a bunch of little smaller things before I made the big thing. It's really hard to make the big thing. It's really hard to make the 600-page epic. It's really hard to write the 300-page book. I wrote a 300-page fantasy novel in prose when I was in high school that will never see the light of day. And I did NaNoWriMo twice. NaNoWriMo is a November challenge with a website where you can go and write an entire book in a month. You write a 50,000 word novella basically in a month. And if you can do it, you've won NaNoWriMo. And everybody gets in there and supports each other and is like encourages each other, and they help you do research. So that's actually a really great place to start. And I'm really glad I did NaNoWriMo, even though I'm probably not going to use any of the material that I wrote when I was in high school. But doing NaNoWriMo was really great because it gave me a feeling of camaraderie with other writers, and it gave me a little writing community, which is so important. Because when you're just starting out, you're by yourself, and it's so hard to stay motivated, and it's so hard to write every day. But when you have friends or colleagues or people around you who are also writing, it really makes it easier to put something out that you're proud of. And even if you're not proud of it, you still did it, and you still especially finished it. If you finish it, that's so great. Even if you hate it, it's so important to finish it, because like the feeling of having finished something proves to you that you can finish something. And that's really hard. Finishing something is so hard. I still have a bunch of projects that I have like open-ended right now that I haven't finished yet. And part of it is because I don't know anybody who's doing that type of writing, and I need to find a community. Like I have a prose book for adults that I'm kind of working on in the background, and it's harder to work on it because I don't know anybody who's writing that. At least I know a couple people, but we're not like an active community together. So that I think is like maybe the central thing is your friends are your power.
Yeah, we've done a few NaNoWriMo support programs at the library over the years, and they're always very appreciated by our authors. We have Julia, who says Beetle is the funniest. And also Tamara says, did you do your own cover?
Yes, I did do my own cover. I also worked with a cover designer at Simon & Schuster. I worked with Becca, who helped me lay out I sent her these sketches in the same way that I would have set out the sketch for a page. So I sent her like a bunch of cover ideas, and she and Julia, and I think folks from S&S Marketing, and I think a couple of other people were looking at the cover and going, okay, well, not this one, not this one, not this one. We like this one. And so there were a couple like scrapped cover ideas that kind of went through the process. But we settled on this one because honestly, it was the best one. I agree with them. This was the greatest one that that I had come up with. So I drew all of it and painted all of it. and then I made the mock-up base that became the title text. I did all of that. I did do all of that lettering except for my name, which is a font. And I did the back cover. But the book designer, who you can find on I think the back of the book or on the flap, but definitely in the credits in the back. The book designer moved the text around and added text, and I worked with her to kind of figure out the way that the color would look and the way that the color would translate from how I had originally painted it to print, which is really difficult. Goodness knows this was such a hard book to color and print. I'm really grateful to the people who helped me out with that, because oh my goodness, if I had to do that myself, that would have been so bad. But because it's full color, it was super hard. But yeah, I did design the cover with the help of a cover designer at my publisher.
We had a lot of supportive comments about Blob Ghost. Lee says, I love Blob Ghost. They're such a great little friend. TJ, Blob Ghost is literally the best. They're going to be a great standout character. We also have Marky saying, we can all see ourselves in Blob Ghost. What a fun character. And Alexandra, Blob Ghost is us. DJ further adds with googly eyes, how did Carroll County inspire your book? And did you incorporate any local places into the book?
TJ knows this. TJ and I are friends.
He's baiting you.
He's baiting me. TJ knows this. When you open chapter 1, you see the bookstore in the mall. That's Books a Million in the mall, which is the bookstore that I used to work at, and where TJ and I met, and where a bunch of my friends all met each other. And we still all hang out somehow, even though we were coworkers. We still all hang out all the time. We were coworkers years ago. But yeah, that the layout of the bookstore, and especially the front of the bookstore, is straight up Books a Million, and you can tell. And the behavior of the beleaguered Pumpkinhead person in chapter 1 is also based on a real experience that I had finding goo in the Books a Million. Somebody had taken a dinosaur slime. It was like a container of play slime with a dinosaur inside of it, and they had upended it onto the carpet in the back, in the kids section. And I found it and was like, someone has left slime in the bookstore. So I think the slime is still there, because I know the carpet cleaners couldn't get it out. They couldn't remove it. So they tried to hide it, but I know where it is. And the puck of slime was definitely the inspiration for the slime scene, as well as like certain little things about the mall you'll like recognize from the Westminster Mall. But one thing that probably most people won't recognize, because it would be a lot more relevant to the mall employees, I tried to make the scene where they break into the back of the mall in one scene, and I tried to make that scene feel like walking in these scary hallways in the back of the mall. There's a bunch of unmarked double doors in the mall where you can if you open them, you'll be in like the back of the mall behind the stores, and that area is terrifying. It is so scary. As you walk down there, your footsteps like echo really scarily, and it like smells weird, and it's just terrifying. It's a horrible place. But yeah, that's the town of Aloes in and of itself was very like designed. Like, it's not based on Westminster, and it's not based on anywhere in Carroll County. It's a hodgepodge of architecture that I liked. But the mall is very much the Westminster Mall, formerly the Cranberry Mall. And its current state. And its state when I worked there, which is a lot like its current state. Anybody who's worked at the mall can tell you that that's the mall, and that's how it is in there. And yeah, that was the main local thing.
Okay. I think a lot of readers are really going to love seeing themselves represented in your book. From Deborah. Do you have any other recommendations of books with LGBTQ plus themes, characters for young readers, and also any advice on how kids can become allies?
Oh, that second question is a really good question. Um, but so here's a couple recommendations. First of all, my friend Zach, who appears in this book as a frog clown, does a webcomic called Paranatural. Paranatural is long and super funny and free to read for anybody. And Paranatural is, I think, maybe one of the funniest pieces of media I've ever read. And it's super duper charming. And there's a lot of like casual representation in Paranatural and a lot of like real experiences being spoken about. And that one is like young reader appropriate across the board. There's also, what's the name of it? The Prince and the Dressmaker, which is technically YA, but I think could be read by anybody, by Jen Wang, I think is her name. But The Prince and the Dressmaker is really, really, really lovely, really gorgeous, and a little bit more, for a little bit of an older audience. But I really think anybody can enjoy it. It's there's no questionable content in it or anything. It's just for a more advanced reader. But that one's really lovely. It's really good at being something that could be applicable to a lot of people. Prince and the Dressmaker is really like across the board. I think you can find yourself in it, which is really nice. I mean, obviously nothing is everyone's experience, but Prince and the Dressmaker is so poetic and lovely and broad. There's also a nonfiction. There's also Tilly Walden. I think is her name. Oh gosh, I'm so worried that I'm going to say somebody's name wrong. But Tilly Walden did Spinning as her most famous book, but she also has fiction. And her books are really gorgeous and really, again, for readers who are a little older, really melancholy and lovely. By older, I mean older than 10, not teenagers. Although teenagers would love them and find them really good, but not for littler kids. There's also Dungeon Critters, which is coming out in September, I believe, and that is by Natalie Reese, my assistant colorist for Beetle, and her girlfriend Sarah Getter. And their book is a magical fantasy adventure starring animals. So it's a really fun, like Redwall-esque time. It's super duper funny. Very like you wouldn't expect it, but very like Captain Underpants humor, like very like snappy, like silly humor that's really, really fun and accessible. I really think it's a book that anybody would love to read, and it would be super fun to read with a kid. I think kids are going to get really attached to it. And also Dungeon Critters is like a feast. It's gorgeous. It's so pretty to look at. And it's similarly, it's painted too. And so I would highly recommend pre-ordering Dungeon Critters. And Dungeon Critters is actually running as a webcomic right now. So you can read the first, I think about the first chapter online right now. If you search Dungeon Critters, I'm sure you'll find it. But it's got a cool cat who can do fire magic, and it's got like a fun frog prince who's like a delightful, like mischievous girl, and a very stoic, sweet giant snake man. And it's about their adventures together. And there's a really fun, high stakes courtroom drama close to the end. It's really incredibly delightful. I love Dungeon Critters, so that would be my big recommendation.
Okay, we're going to try to get to two last questions. I know we've taken up a lot of time for you this evening, but we've had a lot of fun with you, and
Yeah.
we've had a great conversation going on online. So if we didn't get to folks' questions, we'll forward you the link, and maybe you can respond to them directly. I'm sure they'd love that.
Yeah,
Susan,
anybody can email me too.
yeah. Susan says, speaking of visual literacy, children now have different visual literacy than do adults. Did you find that drawing comics for children changed in terms of process in addition to content? And also, what drew you to write this for children?
I think I want to make the story I want to make and then let it find its audience. Most of all, like beyond anything else, I think the story and the characters are the kings of what I want to be making. Like that's the most important thing I'm doing. And so the once I have the characters and once the story is moving, then I can say, oh, this is a book for kids. And that's just what happened naturally. That's just the natural thing that happened with Beetle. And it just ended up that way. As far as visual literacy with kids, I didn't want to simplify the comic down too much. I didn't want to lose readability, but I didn't want to decide not to make it paneled the way I wanted to panel it. I didn't want to change the artistic direction too much when it comes to format, just because it's for children. And so I ended up making kind of a book that maybe very young children might have trouble reading, but a book that doesn't talk down to 8 to 12s, and doesn't feel like it's simplified down. But yeah, I hope that it can be read and enjoyed by a wide range of people, and I hope that that kids. I hope that it gives kids an appreciation for the like visual language of comics, and an appreciation for how the visual language of comics can be like a rich type of art all on its own that is very similar to like the language of filmmaking, where somebody can enter into it and find that they've developed a literacy in it without even trying, in the way that we develop a literacy without even trying with film. So yeah.
And finally, is there a sequel in the works for Beetle?
I have outlined a sequel. I have a sequel in my pocket. So we'll see. We'll have to see about that. I would like for there to be a sequel. I am trying to get there to be a sequel. It is my full intention for there to be a sequel. But we will have to see. The more people who buy the book, the more chance I have of being able to make another one. So everybody who pre-ordered, thank you. Thank you so much. It helps me out so much, especially since I'm competing against some very big contenders for like bestseller lists next week. I think the Twilight book is coming out, and a book for adults by somebody who I admire a lot. Tasmir is putting out Harrow the Ninth, which is a book for adults. Don't give it to kids, but kids won't read it because it's enormous. But little kids won't read it. Kids who are as ambitious a reader as I was might read it, but they won't get it because it's a sequel. But I'm up against some very heavy hitters. So thank you to everybody who has bought the book.
Yep.
I really appreciate it.
And you can buy Aliza's book right here at a Likely Story bookstore. The library will also have it, so you can put your hold on it there as well. I want to thank Aliza and Ted so much for joining us tonight and sharing their time and their love of literature with us. Thank you both.